Hello, and welcome to today's Data Management Insight webinar, hosted by A-Team Group and sponsored by Rhymes. Today's topic is AI in asset management, buy-side attitudes towards Gen AI and LLM. Hello, my name is Andrew Delaney. I'm Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group, and I'll be hosting today's session. It's an exciting session. We'll be talking about how Gen AI and large language models pose both opportunities and risks for people in the asset management segment. And as usual, I'll be joined by a group of esteemed panelists and experts who will be offering up their opinion on the topic. Part of what we'll be doing today is talking about the results of a survey that A-Team conducted along with Rhymes Technology, exploring the appetite, attitudes, and approaches to AI in the asset management function. You can see a QR code on your screen now. If you haven't read the report, if you capture that QR code, it will take you to it. But we would like you to read that a bit later on because we've got some things to discuss before we get to that. So, couple of bits of housekeeping before I introduce the panel. We are going to be using Slido today. There should be next to your screen a Slido panel. We'll be using that for both questions to the panelists and to conduct a number of polls that will take a snapshot view from you, the audience, during this session. The code for the Slido is DMI webinars if you can't get access. Okay. One more piece of sort of housekeeping is to draw your attention to a few additional webinars and happenings we've got coming up in the coming months. Just a few webinars for you around best practices for buy-side data management and conduct risk approaches to surveillance, and also to draw your attention to our latest regulatory data handbook, which you can download again by clicking on the button as per. Right, so what we're going to do before we get going is we're going to ask you to run a poll, to answer a poll, so we can get a little bit of, we're taking the temperature of the audience. So the first poll question we're going to ask you is, where is your organization on their journey of implementing AI for business value creation? Okay, so please do take time and vote on that poll. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. Let me go through my list. I'm going to start with you, Theo. Welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm Theo Bell. I head AI product and service optimization here at Rhymes Technologies. We are a provider of enterprise data management solutions across basically all data that you might need if you're in the financial services industry. And I look after our AI strategy for our products, but also for our internal AI use cases as well.
Very good. Thank you. Jeff.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. Jeff Larkin. I'm the head of digital strategy and delivery at Impacts Asset Management. Impacts invests in the transition to a sustainable economy. I'm responsible for developing a compelling data strategy that can deliver the data architecture, delivery platforms, and business systems across Impacts. For some additional context, I also chair our AI steering group.
That's a great bit of context. Thanks, Jeff. Right, so let me go next to Jay.
Everyone, Jay Dermody. I'm head of AI products at MSCI, where we're leveraging kind of the latest enhancements with AI we're going to talk about here today to build out the next generation risk and portfolio management models and software in order to help professional investors make better investment decisions.
That's great. And finally, Pierre.
Hello, I'm Pierre de Santagat. I'm a lead data scientist in Iceberg Data Lab, which is a French ESG data provider.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to go to the first question, then we're going to come back and take a look at the results of the poll. So quite an open-ended question to begin with. I'll throw it to Jeff and we'll bring the rest of the panel in. Jeff, what is your overall impression of the appetite and level of adoption of generative AI among the asset management community at this point in time?
So I think asset managers, obviously generate and store a huge amount of data to help them make better investment decisions. But I think firms have traditionally had limited capabilities to manage and consume that data. So I'm seeing a very large appetite for GenAI to help with those challenges, but really a very broad spectrum of adoption across the board. For some people, it's still quite superficial and maybe focused on more efficiency gains. Others are more sophisticated use cases, but I'm generally seeing it's harder to get those more sophisticated use cases live. I think everyone has their position on the maturity curve, and I don't think there's any right or wrong answers there.
Absolutely. Early days, as they say, and certainly that was part of what we found. Pierre, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, for sure. There is a strong appetite. On our side, we see clients asking some new tools about both to answer their questions, some details about our scores, about our metrics. We have some queries about extracting data. Extracting data is one way where the appetite is very, very strong. Automatic analyzer of some portfolios, data cleaning, data collections, and also coding. So this is more for internal, but we also see a strong appetite in coding, developing new tools on this.
Very good. Thank you. Jay, what's been your experience so far?
Yeah, definitely. I think anyone who's interacted with the technology is impressed and kind of surprised at what it can do sometimes, right? And so certainly we all want to be more efficient. We want to be more effective in our work and seeing applications into data acquisition and how just making kind of the core operations more efficient within the organization. The challenge is how do you ensure high quality when doing that, right? LLMs don't behave like traditional machines that we've built in the past, right? And so how do you build up the processes around that to ensure that people trust the results that come off of these latest generative AI technologies? And so a lot of the work that I see kind of we're doing as well as clients is around trying to build up that validation process and ultimately the level of trust that users can have with the results coming off of these AI technologies.
Very good, and we'll be exploring some of these themes a bit later in the show, as it were. Theo, your impressions.
Yeah, I mean, I think just echo what the other panelists have said. I mean, there's definitely appetite, but adoption varies. In my experience, that's sort of been due to a range of factors. Things sort of concerns around lack of expertise. Many of our clients are sort of smaller, medium-sized asset managers, and they don't necessarily have people with the right skill sets to do this. Security is a big concern. Nobody wants their data being leaked or being used to train a big model. And also, I think regulatory uncertainty is a big topic, right? You don't want to invest in something only to find out that next year you can't do it. But sort of that being said, like there's a whole range. Some people are barely getting started and really, need our help bootstrapping their process, and then other people have had hundreds of people doing this for years, and I learn lots when I talk to them. So it's a wide range.
Definitely a wide spectrum. Let's have a look at the poll results and see what people are up to. Perhaps this is to be expected. Panelists, is any great surprise here? People are starting to look at new, how they can create new value propositions, differentiate product experience, etc. Any big surprise there?
I think it's good to see that productivity benefits is not the first one, because I think that's sort of the easiest place to start, and that sort of suggests that people who've moved on slightly from, I don't want to say just productivity improvements, because there's tons to be had, but it's nice to see that people are sort of moving along that maturity curve up and actually creating some new value.
Totally agree. Excellent. Good. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. I'll pose this one to Jay. In our survey, things like research summarization, data validation, ESG. These types of things featured highly on the list of use cases identified by the research. Are these surprising to you, and which other areas do you see as being ripe for becoming AI enabled?
I mean, I don't think it surprises me too much, as those are the areas where kind of the initial generation of generative AI tech has been very good, right? So, translation, being able to go from image to text or semi-structured to structured, be able to look at large quantities of data and make sure that things look okay from the perspective of the LLM is kind of where it's been good at, and that's been an easy application, right? As Theo kind of mentioned, right? The productivity enhancements is kind of the first place to go to. But I'm certainly heartened by the 40% of you all who saw new product development and differentiated experiences as one of the key drivers of where we're going with this journey, right? Because I certainly agree with that, right? When you think about how to provide kind of personalized portfolio management at scale, which is so key to kind of just the overall trends and growth in the asset management industry, right? The way that we do that is by having kind of more of the information about what makes each of us unique at our fingertips, and how can we create an experience, right? Tell the story of the portfolios in a way that resonates, and kind of is aligned with the ultimate investors that we all kind of manage money for. And so I'm certainly very excited to see the early movement in applications of AI to provide more of that personalization, to be able to scale out this within the broader asset management community. I think ultimately will provide better investments, better outcomes for our end investors.
Very good. I like that phrase, personalized portfolio management at scale. That sounds really punchy. Jeff, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm seeing very similar themes on the research side. Consuming, drawing conclusions and insights is a very time-consuming activity, but in a very essential activity. And the more you can consume, potentially the better the results. Generative AI is a huge part of the solution there. I think data validation, fine. I think it has a real place to play. I think ESG data is a really interesting area because it is very expensive to procure. There's large volumes of data to analyze. But I think there's also the potential to use GenAI to help disintermediate some of those traditional data providers. Maybe I shouldn't say that here, but to build out your own ESG data sets direct from sources, from annual reports, public domain data, satellite data like Copernicus. I think it's really really exciting, some of those use cases. But outside of those ones you mentioned, just use it. We shouldn't. I realize we want to look ahead, but we shouldn't also forget about those efficiency gains and just being able to use GenAI to help analysts to write stock level investment commentaries, to help complete client RFPs. It's a massive time saving to most organizations.
Very good. Thank you all. Okay, so we're going to run the next poll now. So let's pull that one up. This one talks about challenges. So we'll run this poll. What do you consider to be the biggest challenges in realizing return on investment from adopting Gen AI? You can vote multiple times on this one. While you are voting, I'm going to ask the panelists what they think about this. So let's see. I'll throw it back to you, Jeff, on this one. Many firms in the survey indicated concern about the level of expertise required to make best use of AI. How can firms work with third parties to add value to their AI efforts? Just by way of context, a lot of people were quite worried about understanding, getting their organizations to understand when it was appropriate to use AI, when not appropriate, and just the expertise in getting really the best out of the models that they were using. So looking for how should people work with third parties to add value? Jeff?
I think there's a number of different areas here. On the infrastructure side of things, I think there's a lot of big firms out there, the likes of Microsoft, Snowflake, more domain-specific providers like Rhymes that asset managers that can lean on. I think from a training and adoption perspective, that can become very expensive very quickly, getting external help with that. So, I think we tend to feel that there's a balance to be found there between using external third parties, consultants, and so on, plus the talented people that we have internally. Building out those sort of champion type programs, I think is a great way of helping with that adoption. I think that the third area I'd highlight is a lot of the traditional vendors that we're working on, that we work with, are rapidly building in their own AI capabilities, and I think that is a way of bootstrapping yourself and getting ahead. I think it's still fairly early days on that though, and to be confirmed on the value of those, or whether it's just really a bit of a gimmick. But I think there's a number of different areas there.
Very good. Pierre, let me ask you that.
My opinion is that there is a huge range of use cases, and depending on the use case, it can require skills or not. For example, if you just want to make a little prototype of an application of GenAI on your company, let's assume you have one developer. It's fairly easy to have a few lines of code connect to an API for an applications. Then if you want to industrialize it to make a real product within your company, it can require some data engineering skills. But the good thing is that unless you really want to train a new model, you don't need machine learning skills because you are using external API. If at some point you decide to invest more into fine-tuning some models, for example, here you will require some specific skills. But otherwise, there is a little proof of concept, in my opinion, is quite easy to achieve. Then, of course, to industrialize it, to make it a robust product, you usually need extra workforce. Asking third-party help, like third-party developers, is a very good thing to try. One thing to mention is confidentiality of your data. So, depending on the level of trust you have with your third party, it can be some third-party engineers where you have to trust them to provide the data set, for example, or directly the third-party API, because if you give some data to such API, you know that your data is not staying within your walls, and this needs to be taken into consideration when you want to build an AI application.
Very good, thank you. Maybe we can look at the poll for a second then, and maybe Theo, we can bring you back in, have a look at this. I mean, we've talked about this report in front of audiences a few times now, Theo, and I think that poor data quality has come up a lot, and we're going to come to that. But this is the first time I've seen lack of explainability, bias, and privacy concerned as a top concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, right? I mean, it is sort of like, I read something the other day that said we shouldn't actually call it artificial intelligence because it's more something like augmented, etc. Right? Like, I think people still sort of feel like it's magic and therefore it can solve all problems. And I think that goes back to the what's an actually appropriate use case kind of thing. But it's sort of really hard to tell what it's doing and why. But the privacy concerns, I think you can sort of handle by making sure that you really understand the tools that you're using and any third parties that you're using with, to make sure that the security is there and that your data is not being leaked. And I think that sort of goes back to the sort of like the build versus buy, right? Like if you're going to build everything yourself, you need to have the expertise to do that. But it's probably a lot easier to sort of I guess in some ways hire integrators who can then, help you leverage third-party things. But then you really need to make sure that you're asking those questions about what are they actually doing under the hood with your data, and sort of how are they helping you to explain the explainability.
Very good. Okay, well, let me the next question. This actually segues quite nicely into the next question, which does concern data quality and the applicability of data sets. I think there was a quote from the report which likened GenAI to garbage in, garbage out on steroids. So the question to the panel, and I'll direct this one at Jay, is what steps should firms be taking to ensure the quality and applicability of the data sets they use as inputs to their AI models to ensure best results?
This is obviously kind of very, very important, right? As Theo mentions, right, where we are in the AI right now is that it is augmented intelligence. I really like that term, right? And when we go out to kind of build out our kind of AI-driven products, right? So we built a AI insights offering that helps risk managers understand the primary drivers of risk in their portfolios through the lens of our factor models, and then communicate and have that kind of better conversation with investment management teams around those drivers, right? Leveraging GenAI to kind of create narratives around those primary drivers to facilitate those conversations. And in doing so, it became very important to us that we're not asking the LLM to reason it all directly against the client portfolios, right? The LLMs are smart, but they're not that smart. We have to provide all the facts that we want to anchor it against as input into the LLM in order to generate narratives that are kind of aligned against those facts. And so the importance of data quality is around what are those facts you're kind of anchoring the LLM about that you provide directly to it, and ensuring high quality there, because the LLM can't check it, right? It's just going to use what you say and assume it's correct, and then parrot that down the line. And so we're seeing an increasing importance associated with data acquisition, data validation associated with that, ensuring quality, and ensuring that alignment of the data is associated with it, right? There's so much that needs to go into ensuring that that the data is intelligible, that it makes sense, that you can kind of reason about it in the right way. And we can use AI to help facilitate that, right? With the explosion of data coming in, but you kind of really need to trust that your processes are correct, that you have those validations incorrect coming in, because ultimately that's what's going to go to the end client. And so making sure there's a human in the loop, kind of to make sure that they're validating everything at a high level, but then that you have a process in place to make sure that things are correct.
Very good. Theo, how have you, in terms of when you're talking to clients about this, what are you talking to them about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I encourage people to start small and start with data that you understand and is clean, because then when you see the results of the AI saying one thing or another, you can tell whether that's because you gave it bad data or whether it's just not behaving the way you expect, right? And that sort of helps you get started. I think also high quality data is just going to continue to become more and more important, right? And this is something that where you can get help from third parties like Rhymes or other or Jay's MSCI as well. But sort of try to outsource some of that data quality if that makes sense for your business model, because we have sort of the economies of scale that some of the third parties have, you can leverage. But yeah, also use monitoring and alerting. You can sort of run validation checks on these models regularly to make sure they give you the same answer they did the day before, things like that. And ultimately, I guess, choose something that's valuable so that all this effort is worthwhile, because it is a lot of effort to have a production AI use case that actually works, and it should hopefully be answering a question that's actually important to your business.
Very good. And finally, Pierre.
Yes, I would say that the power of GenAI to me is the ability to work with unstructured data, whether is it on the input or on the output. Because if you have structured data as input, you want to compute some formulas, anything, and you want a structured output, then there is no point of using GenAI. You can use a standard algorithm for this, and it will work fine. But GenAI is really suited for unstructured input or output. And in this case, of course, it's a hard task to infer some structure from it. And sometimes it's not that you have given wrong data or bad data, it's just that you have given it messy data. So maybe it's not very easy to understand, even for a human. And in this case, of course, you can have bad output. For this issue, there are several ways that we are testing on our side to reduce this risk. Is for example to restrict the domain of search of your model to some documents, to the specific documents that you are interested in. And even this, giving a document, you can restrict to some pages, some paragraphs, if you are looking at text. This is one of the way to reduce the level of hallucinations or bad quality output. You can have other ideas like defining into your prompt some methods that it can help the model, some examples, and improving the way you build your data set. For example, one of the use case we have is extracting data from PDF. PDF is a very free format. And for example, if you convert PDF into text, well, you lose a lot of information, you lose a lot of structure from it, and improving this part, for example, before giving it to your GenAI applications might help the final pipeline quality. And of course, using images can help if you are working with a PDF. So this is one kind of examples that we have on our side.
Very interesting. I mean, when people started first talking about big data, this was sort of the dream, was be able to tap into all these unstructured data sets, but no one really had any technology to do it. But now it seems like it's actually coming to fruition. And again, this is moving into our next question, after which I'll pause to look at some of the Slido questions. Pierre, you've sort of touched on this a little bit, but let me just let you round it out. With data validation was identified as a key use case in the research we did. So you've mentioned a few ways, but other ways that AI can be applied to improve data quality through data capture, integration, validation. These are things that are real and people are using it for now.
Yeah, for sure. And on our side, we really focus on the first GenAI extractions, for example, and then the human validation, which usually come after, because for now we have we have some experts in the company that will have the highest level of validation quality. So the AI is coming first, makes some good extractions, some bad extractions, and we want to reduce the time our analysts can spend on checking the quality of this, and being sure that the level of quality is good enough so that they do not give up the tool, and they do not try to use their legacy search in document methods like they were used to do. It's a product that is built in collaboration between the tech side and the non-tech side. The tech side needs inputs from testers that will say, okay, in this case, the model has extracted something completely wrong. In this case, it's working super great. And this is the way you will build your product. You cannot expect to build a perfect product from scratch. So you really need to improve a little by little by collaborating with the end user of your tool.
Very good. Theo, in terms of that data captured, integration, validation process, this is a reality now?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like web scraping to sort of create structured data sets from unstructured contents, whether that could be things like, we know use cases where people are trying to collect data about, sort of privately listed companies from just scraping their websites and turning that into sort of org charts and things like that. And that's obviously something that you could do manually before, or you could write Python scripts and things to do it. But it's a lot easier to do it now with GenAI. But I think think also that human in the loop that was mentioned before, like that's to me is really key. And I don't want to say that we'll never get away from that. I think obviously some processes will gain more trust in over time, but really being able to make those humans who have a lot of this judgment in their head more effective by making sure they don't have to do it all manually, or they don't have to look at all the the data quality alerts that have come up this week kind of thing, but by themselves. So I think it's sort of, a lot of stuff you can do on the capture side of things, as well as like a lot of sort of entity resolution type use cases, which is critical once you've sort of parse that unstructured data. Ultimately, it has to link to your existing data sets. You need to know what security or what entity is being referred to. And there are many sort of more traditional ML models that you can to use that. But this idea of like sort of semantically, are these two things the same, is something that the GenAI stuff is really good at, that you used to just have to put a lot of effort into training models, but now you kind of get out of the box.
Very good, thank you. And finally, Jay, maybe in context of some of your earlier remarks, how these processes working now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's as Theo mentioned, right? Human in the loop is so critical to kind of getting success here. And one of the things that's been really exciting for us is thinking about all of the new data sets we can start to apply into the investment management space, right? And so things like geolocation data sets that scrape out for private and public assets, where they're actually located, so we can better understand the biodiversity associated and biodiversity impact associated with some of their investments, right? That's just data that would be very, very challenging to get previously that now we can start to access by leveraging some of these generative AI technologies. And then ensuring the high quality around that, it's really about kind of trying to leverage more and more of the AI to be agentic workflows that can automate some of these kind of daily processes. And I think we're starting to see the early stages of that right now, where we can start to turn over, as Theo kind of mentions, more and more of the kind of processing to the LLMs with the higher quality models that are coming out. But we still need to make sure that there's a human overseeing things, making sure things are going, using some of those more traditional machine learning methods, as Theo mentions, to do kind of just very simple kind of alert detection and making sure that things are aligned. And we've seen that kind of all the way through the stack, from kind of data acquisition through the end results that we give the clients can benefit from those more traditional machine learning techniques.
Very good, thank you. I said I would go to Slido next, but instead of going to Slido, I'm going to just remind people in the audience that we do have a Slido running. You can ask questions. We've got a good few coming through, but I'm going to squeeze in one of my own questions before we come to our Slido questions. So you've got a few more minutes just to ask a couple of questions if you have any. But I just want to just carry on this theme really, but sort of move into the area of privacy and security. These were big concerns that came up from the research, as we mentioned, and were mentioned in the poll earlier. Jeff, throw to you. How can these issues be addressed so that we can achieve secure usage of AI, mitigate things against things like data leakage, and of course ensure regular compliance with global regulations? What are best practice approaches, if there are any?
I mean, I think it's important to see Gen AI for what it is. It's at the end of the day, it's just another way of consuming data and creating new data off of the back of it. So I think all of the traditional information security, factors and processes that have been in place for many years are still vital. They're an integral part of the the securing of Gen AI as well. Arguably even more so going forward, because there's no more security through obscurity. Previously documents on some random share on the network, people would probably never find. With Gen AI, it's going to surface all of that data. Great for red teaming, but not so great if if you've got documents that should be protected that aren't. So traditional methods, data classification, data cataloging, data lineage. I know it sounds boring because people have talked about it forever, but it is vital. I guess moving forward to the more sort of AI specific controls. Yeah, I think it's vital, that you protect against that data leakage that you mentioned. My recommendations are not to use the free consumer grade tools, because you're not quite sure often what's happening. Any prompts that you send, any questions that you send, are probably going back to training those models. So I think it's vital that you license the enterprise grade tools, the ones that have got the enterprise data protection built in, with the relevant legal commitments, just to make sure that you're not training your provider's data models. I think the other point I'd mention is that governance around this is vital. Having processes, without being overly burdensome to the business. I think it is important that you do capture and understand what the use cases are of AI, that you validate the tools that you're using. Using things like impact assessments to really dig into are these tools having any personal security issues, and any other issues that can be concerned again. But again, that's kind of quite a historic approach in many respects that's always been done for data protection. So yeah, leverage all of those tools that we've had in the past, just as important, if not more important, plus the new controls that you can put on top.
Very good, thank you. Theo, anything to add to that? Maybe mention of regulation and obligations there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've heard this, I guess, from a couple of different conferences I've been to recently, that although there are going to be, there are already some AI specific regulations, and there probably will be more, that in general, I mean, we already have a lot of regulations in this industry that say don't do bad things, and they all still apply. This is just another way of doing things, and admittedly, things can go wrong faster with AI than they can with some of the more traditional techniques, but the guardrails in some ways are largely already there, right? Although I guess, and for some specific applications, particularly, I think maybe some non-financial stuff around, facial recognition and things like that. Like we need some new rules around that. But in terms of internal compliance with things, I think, the governance that Jeff mentioned is super important. And I would highly recommend establishing a sort of, I guess, an AI council of sorts. We have one here at Rhymes, with diverse representation from across, the business as well as cultures, because that bias and the sort of what kinds of use cases are going to be okay, is something that you want to make sure aligns with your company's principles, and the local laws as well. And that sort of can help you. It doesn't have to be super formal, but it's just something to make sure that you've got more than one person thinking, hey, I know, I'm going to pop all of our data into this, random thing that I found on the internet. And yeah, often it is the bigger players who, do have the enterprise data controls in place, and they might be somewhat slower moving. Like we use the sort of Microsoft Azure environment with, the AI tools that they make available in there, because then we know it's ring-fenced and secure for our data and our clients. It also means, when my boss pings me and says, oh, one mini's open, can we use it? And I'm like, no, we got to wait for Azure. So you have to sort of, it does slow you down a little bit, but I think that additional protection, knowing that nobody's going to accidentally leak the data, is super important.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take a pause and look at some of these Slido questions. Got a few in here. Let's try and squeeze a few of these in. So again, the panel hasn't seen these, so they're under the spotlight here a little bit. So I'm looking for volunteers. First one: are there areas where AI simply won't be implemented? And we're in the context of the asset management, investment management side of the world. Any thoughts on this, panelists?
I mean, I'm happy to go first, and okay. I think Theo hit the nail on the head earlier, when she said about humans in the loop. I think we're a long way away from fully automated AI for either investment decisions or or marketing or client collateral going straight out of the business. So yeah, a long way away from that.
Very good. If there's no other, I mean, relatedly, what are the privacy issues right now of asking ChatGPT a question about an investment? I mean, I guess the issue is around data leakage, and who knows what you're going to get back, right?
Yeah, and also bear in mind that, most of the questions that you type in are going to be not only visible to OpenAI or whatever provider, similar type provider that you're using, but they may or may not use that to train their models. Sometimes you can opt out and things like that. But bear in mind, it's sort of like putting it on a postcard or putting it in the newspaper. And so if it's the kind of question that's appropriate for, then fine. But yeah. I know we've trained our co-pilot to not give any sort of investment advice to try to avoid getting us into hot water, but I think a lot of them probably aren't going to allow you to do that just because they don't. It's not a good thing to be trying to do.
We've got another question about investment advice. Can you discuss any specific instances where AI has significantly outperformed traditional investment strategies? Again, I think this is I think they were in the realm.
I think we're at the stage now where LLMs are not going to give you better investment advice than a traditional kind of strategy will do, right? Like that's just not in the wheelhouse of what it's looking to accomplish, right? There's certainly a bunch of non-generative AI techniques people have been working on for years and years and years around kind of quantitative investing and how to apply data science and to identify market inefficiencies and capture them, right? Like that's good work, right? We should continue to do that. But we're a long way from ChatGPT being able to outperform the market just by asking questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
That being said, there are funds out there, right? I remember Voya, for instance, have an AI fund, and I haven't checked how well it's performing or not, but like people are doing this, but I think as Jay said, it's not just GenAI, it's obviously a lot of more traditional because it tends to be better at analyzing numbers really than GenAI. But yeah, it's a space to watch out for sure.
Certainly, I remember speaking to one of the respondents of the survey about this, and the conversation went more around the lines of we'd be interested in creating a fund of AI providers than actually using AI to generate investment returns. But anyway, that's sort of the way they were thinking. This one's a bit more practical. Do you have any good samples of AI output quality/health checks that both a business and a compliance unit may be able to run? So I guess health checks really. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, in terms of this, sorry, go ahead, Pierre.
Yeah, on our side, for example, we have built a whole pipeline of benchmarking the quality of the output, and it has taken us some time to build, and it's you cannot it's a mandatory step you have to go through if you want to have a good production grade product on your company. And the ideal path is that little by little, the end user and the human validator of your product will help building this checking data set, so that you don't have to do it yourself, and you leverage on the parallel human validations that you can have, and it's really something very interesting because for example, the model works well on some points you would not expect it would work that well, and it fails on some other aspects you hadn't thought of before. So having some benchmarking and testing pipeline is a very good way to work.
I will say, you mentioned kind of, that the importance of doing this, right? We can be very quick to kind of build up a proof of concept that leverages this to kind of just show that this could be work, this could be interesting, right? So the demos pretty well, but moving it from something that can demo pretty well within the controlled environment, if you know what questions you're asking, is something that works with the wide variety of something that the user might ask is very hard, right? Getting that kind of level of quality up into a place where you can trust what's coming out of is a very challenging process. And so the high importance of having a very large kind of data set of sample questions and the output that is quality against you continue to test your model is critical to be able to do exactly what Pierre mentions and be able to build something that works for clients.
Very good. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think I referred to earlier about our impact assessment, and you can find AI impact assessments. Microsoft have a very comprehensive one, for example. I think it's important to have that structured approach, and to use it sort of consistently across the across all AI tools, so that you're actually digging into, what are the potential biases, what are the impacts of that. Do we have enough documentation from the provider? How can they justify, what testing have they done to support it? How important is this tool for our business? Is it a minor efficiency tool, or is it something that we want to use to help drive investment returns? So yeah, it's a very structured approach to that assessment.
Very good. Okay. Got a couple of questions here about hallucinations and other biases, I guess. So what is the best large language model out there that handles hallucination issues? But maybe widen that. How should we be handling hallucination issues? And actually, there's another question. Will AI tools evolve sufficiently to address these themselves?
I think they will ultimately. I think it's important to remember that, although today there are many use cases where that's an issue or things you wouldn't trust AI to do, but this is literally the worst it's ever going to be, right? And it's not going to take long before these tools are even more capable. In the meantime, this sort of idea of having a sort of agentic framework where you can get, different LLMs to answer the same question and then have something else compare the answers, right? Like if you ask 5 models the same question, they all give you the same answer. There's, a higher probability it's not a hallucination, but obviously if they've all been trained on the same internet, then it could still be the case. One thing that we do, I guess, is we do a lot of sort of text to SQL stuff. So we're getting the AI to write the code, but then we run the code to get the data. We don't let the AI go and get the answer, go get the number from the database, because then you have a potential for it making it up, right? So there are sort of things like that you can do as well. But ultimately, I think this will get better, I think.
I think there's also, this is not necessarily an LLM issue per se. It's also how you use that model. Again, I'm not Microsoft apologist, but we use Copilot quite a lot, and there's different ways you can use it. You can target the web, you can target the the Microsoft graph, so that you're ensuring that it's only using data, internal data within our environment. You can build custom GPTs and only feed it very specific sets of knowledge. So I think there's outside the actual model itself, it's how you use the model.
Very good. Actually, I've got a question here. I think there's a sort of along these lines, Jeff, but throw it to the entire panel. I have a sense that for targeted uses, narrow language models would be more efficient than large language models in terms of data targeting and quantity management. Your view. Do you agree with that, folks?
I would say that,
for sure. Yeah, go ahead, Pierre.
For sure, you have no use of having a super heavy model if you have a very specific task for it. For example, if you want to extract one specific type of data of a source, you don't need a huge model that also know how to write a model or a cooking recipe. So we are lucky. There are a lot of smaller models that are released, many in open source, and more and more we are seeing applications of people using smaller models, sometimes self-hosting small models to use for this use case. But for now, the large ones, perform very well in terms of generalization of your tasks. So depending on how wide is your task, indeed, it can be worth just using a smaller model.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add those smaller models are also more easily to be hosted internally on your own hardware, sometimes even on your own laptop. And that tends to also help with a lot of the sort of security and data privacy issues. Because if you can, make the model small enough to run on your own computer, you know that nothing bad is going to happen.
Very good. Okay, I think we are running out of time, so I'm going to close down the Slido now and just ask one more round of questions to our audience before we close out, so everyone's off on the hour for the school run or whatever else you have to do at this time of the day. Get that cup of coffee to keep you going. Right, so my final question to the panel, and I'll start with you, Jeff, is what are your top 1 or 2 tips for practitioners who are working with or implementing AI in their organization right now? What are the top things they should think about?
Sure. So, it may be boring, but I think it's really vital that people think about AI governance and how you're going to, govern this framework within your organization. Decide what your approach to AI for your firm is. Whether as a firm you want to be on the leading edge, fast follower, happy to take a more measured approach. Communicate that internally. Don't apologize for it, and stick to it. I don't think there's any right or wrong approach there, but it's to be thoughtful and consistent. I think the other point I would just focus on is adoption. Starting small, others have mentioned that. Focusing on that training. The internal training, not necessarily the training of the model. You may not be creating your own model. Measuring the results and communicating the successes. I think that communication point is vital.
Very good. Jay.
Yeah, 2 things kind of jump to mind. One, continue off of what Jeff said in terms of kind of starting small, kind of within the organization. I think establishing kind of a broad learning program across all the different functions can be very, very helpful, right? We're seeing applications of AI, to everyone, right? It's not just the data science team working over here that needs to be kind of familiar with this, right? There are tools, there are techniques, there are kind of content and capabilities that everyone benefits from. And so establishing kind of that sort of learning program across the organization to kind of share that knowledge can be very helpful in just building those up, right? And building up that knowledge base. And then the other one I would just mention is the importance of kind of thinking forward, right? This AI, as Theo mentioned, it's going to keep getting better, right? So the worse it is right now. And so how can you build kind of your data processes, the metadata that surrounds the data that you use every day to be kind of forward compatible with where AI is going to be, right? Because the easier that you make everything to digest in a kind of AI form, easier it's for you to access it in the future. And so I think that companies need to start thinking about that as well.
Thanks, Jay. Pierre.
For 2 tips, I would say first, identify your needs in terms of products. If you have some processing to do from structured data to structured data, don't use GenAI. A basic algorithm will work better, and you will have a way better control of the data output you have. If you are using unstructured data, then of course identify the level of privacy your clients could accept. For example, if you use public data, use third-party APIs. If you use more confidential data, some clients will ask you, will accept for you to have to use some external APIs if you are enterprise grade, or if you have taken the box of not being trained on. Some won't accept it. Some will only accept if it's locally hosted on your cluster. So talk to your clients to see which level of data privacy they would like to, and to focus on such infrastructure afterwards.
Thank you, Pierre. And Theo.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I definitely agree with everything that's been said. Experiment you know, at home as well as at work, but, you know, be safe. See what works, see what doesn't, leverage that network of champions from across the business. And I guess to sort of return to a point I said earlier about build versus buy, like, you know, consider which stuff that you think you really should do yourself versus getting other people to do. I think it was Jeff Bezos who said you should focus on what makes your beer taste better and sort of use other people for everything else. There's a few exceptions to that, but I think in general, sort of invest where you have a moat, you know, things like PDF parsing, you know, although well, it's tempting to try to do that yourself, it's getting better and better and it's quite commoditized at this point. So like maybe you want to leverage a third party for that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Right, we are just about out of time. So it leaves me to thank our panelists for today. Thanks very much to Jeff, Pierre, Jay, and Theo, and thank you to Rhymes for sponsoring today's webinar. I would like to draw your attention in the audience to our survey. Please do go and download the survey. It's on our website. You can find it there if you didn't capture the QR code earlier. Finally, we have a RegTech event coming up in New York, November 21st. We'll be discussing some of the topics that we've discussed today. So if you are in New York at that time, or you plan to be, or you'd like to be, then please do get in touch with us, whether you want to attend or sponsor or whatnot. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so once again, thanks to the panelists. Great session today. Finally, thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We'll see you next time. And on that note, we'll say goodbye. Thanks, everybody.